Greetings to us all. Today we look at Colossians chapter 4, which is the last chapter of Colossians. Paul begins this chapter by addressing the masters concerning how they should treat their servants, that they should treat them fairly and justly, because they themselves, the masters, have a master who is in heaven. That it was important for them to remember that just as how they are treating their servants, there's a master who they would want to treat them well. So it was important that they remembered this and how they treated their servants. We see that in the last chapter, which is Colossians chapter 3, Paul had talked to the servants, addressed the servants in the last part of that chapter concerning how they should behave towards their masters. So it was also important that Paul addressed the masters concerning this matter as well. Paul goes on to talk about prayer, encouraging the church to continue steadfastly in prayer, that is to be persistent in prayer, being watchful and with thanksgiving. It was important that he encouraged them to continue giving thanksgiving at this particular juncture because he was in prison, and perhaps for the church it would have been difficult to be giving thanksgiving at that time, knowing that Paul was in prison. But it's a reminder even to us that in all situations, at all times, we should give thanks to God. We have a reason to be grateful. We have something that we can always thank God for. Still on the issue of prayer, Paul went on to ask the church to pray that doors of opportunities will be opened for the word, and that the ministers of the word will be able to declare the mystery of Christ, and that they make it clear. And this is important in that it's very important that as the ministers of the word go out to preach the word, that the people who are to receive that word, that it becomes clear to them, and that the utterance that is coming out of the mouths of whoever is ministering the word is utterance that comes from above, with the use of what the Lord has sent them to speak. And importantly, Paul talks about how the church should behave, especially toward those who are outside the church. He talks about speech, that let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt. The way we interact with most people during our day-to-day activities and encounters is through words. And it's important as believers that how we speak really reflects on who Christ is. It makes an impression on those who are not part of us yet, that they should see something that makes them want to be like us, to think, there's something special about these people. What is it? I also want it. And then lastly, I love the last part of Colossians chapter 4, the final greetings. Paul mentions quite a number of people that he calls his fellow servants, fellow prisoner even, and it shows how he had a support system amongst those who he did the work of God with. And it's important in this day for our ministers of the word, for ourselves, to have that support system. Imagine Paul was in prison, but he had people he could send to encourage the church do we have such a support system that if we're not there, the work of God would still continue. They'll still move with the vision or with the calling that God has given. And this was important in Paul's life, and it was evident. And of note, he even mentioned a fellow prisoner who he was with, to show that even in the times that it's tough, we need to have people who can empathize with us, who can be with us even in the trenches, in those hard times. So may we be blessed as we reflect upon this chapter, and as this is the last chapter of Colossians, I pray and hope that we have been blessed from devotions from the book of Colossians. God bless us.